Carlson, tonight we have a major news alert out of Arizona tonight that pertains to that state's statewide election. We'll tell you what that is in just a minute. But first up, for the second time in living memory, there is an election recount crisis in the state of Florida tonight. Just last week, as you'll remember, Republicans Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis defeated Democrats Bill Nelson and in the Senate. The process so far is not inspiring confidence in the system. President Trump has complained about it, as have plenty of other people, including some journalists and Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. But it turns out that complaining about this is not allowed. So to restate the rules, in case you've forgotten, when a Republican wins an election, it is fine to question the legitimacy of the process. Democrats have been doing that since the very day Trump was elected 2 years ago. That is patriotic. It's your duty. But when the Democratic Party's power is at stake, raising any question at all about the process is wrong. Indeed, it's nothing less than the road to dictatorship. Watch.
He's basically trying to undermine at every turn. It's not just Florida. He weighed in on Arizona. He's weighed in on other races. He's undermining the legitimacy of elections.
Where he doesn't like the results.
Where he doesn't like the results. And that is a hallmark of a failing democracy, of someone moving towards an authoritarian.
He's authoritarian, scream the authoritarians. Meanwhile, defending the results of elections that have already been called is now the same as overturning elections. Listen to incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi explain how this works.
The president has been saying that there's election fraud in Florida. What do you think is happening in Broward County?
My experience with the president is any time he charges somebody with something, he's just projecting what he might have done himself. We are not engaged.
Election fraud?
Well, obstruction, suppression of the vote.
Suppression. Nancy Pelosi did not use that word accidentally. The term is meant to evoke images of a darker time in American history, a time of night riders and burning crosses, a time very few living Americans remember personally, but that lives in our collective memory. This kind of talk can be politically useful. That's why they do it. That's why it's a theme on the left, in case you haven't noticed. In Broward County, for example, ballot counting is overseen by a woman called Brenda Snipes. Snipes was previously caught illegally destroying ballots. This time around, she's apparently mixed invalid provisional ballots with valid ones. That sounds bad. But don't dare criticize Snipes for the way she does her job. According to MSNBC, the only relevant fact about Brenda Snipes is the color of her skin. Watch.
Here is the way they are treating Brenda Snipes, who is the longtime election supervisor there, who, by the way, is an older black woman in the Deep South. Okay, just keep that in mind as you watch this video.
If you look at the person, in this case a woman, involved, she has had a horrible history.
So in case you're wondering what demagoguery looks like, you just saw it. But why now? Why are they doing this now? Democrats are acting like they've been robbed of power somehow. And yet in elections just last week that all of us saw, Democrats gained power. They retook the House of Representatives after 8 years. They added several governorships. They nearly broke even in the Senate. That was not enough, though. They want more, and they will use any means necessary to get it. In Palm Beach County, the county canvassing board disqualified a vote because it was cast by a non-citizen. Non-citizens are not allowed to vote in federal elections. It is illegal. It also never happens in this country, ever. We're told that again and again, and anyone who disagrees is racist. But in this case, it actually did happen. Nobody disputes that. The Democrats' response to this happening? Attorneys for Gillum and Nelson said the vote should not be disqualified. They objected to the disqualification because the only thing that matters to them in the end is winning. It's easy to find yourself thinking like this if you believe politics is holy war. To a religious extremist, an election is not a contest between fellow Americans who disagree on policy. It's an existential battle between good and evil. Evil must be vanquished at all costs, no matter what. Kirsten Gillibrand has reached this conclusion. Now, Senator Gillibrand is not an obvious candidate for America's leading moral voice. She was a longtime friend and defender of Harvey Weinstein's, for example. But listen to her now, preaching like it's the last Sunday in Lent.
Are you staying in the Senate, or are you going to run for president?
I've been thinking about it because, as we said earlier, what President Trump has been putting into this country is so disturbing, so divisive, so dark that I believe that I've been called to fight as hard as I possibly can to restore that moral integrity, that moral decency.
That sounds like a yes.
So I'm thinking about it.
Moral integrity, moral decency. That's what Democrats are telling you they are defending. And if you think about it for a minute, that is worrisome. People who know how deeply flawed they are tend not to overreach. They have humility. But when you're a holy warrior on a mission from God, what won't you do? Craig Patrick is political editor and chief investigator at WTVT Fox in Tampa Bay, and he joins us tonight with the very latest on this story. What is the state of play as of right now in this recount?
It's a mess. You have a growing list of blunders and gaffes on both sides. Yes, Bill Nelson is still trailing Rick Scott by some 12,500 votes. It would be unprecedented that he would catch up, but they're continuing the process. It's day two. I want to come back to something you said because it illustrates the problem in Southeast Florida and the kinds of blunders we've seen. When we say they mixed provisional ballots, the canvassing board had gone through to determine which ones they wanted to accept, which ones they wanted to reject, and then after that, jumbled some of them together, saying, oops, we got them mixed up. Now we don't know which one is which. It's an example of the kind of blunders we've seen not just this year, but in years prior. And when you combine that with Broward County election managers saying they didn't know or wouldn't say how many ballots they still have to count days after the election, and now they're saying, and Palm Beach County, too, they need more time. They don't see how they can complete a machine recount by Thursday, while some counties are already there or very close to it. When you look at all of these things, it's easy to see how people outside of Florida can look at this and say, nobody can be this stupid. There must be something nefarious. Have covered Florida for some length of time say, have you met the election managers in South Florida? That operation has been a rolling calamity for years, mistake after mistake, and it takes something like 3 different statewide races being affected for it to rise to the level that it currently has and get the scrutiny that it deserves. And at the same time, this is playing out in the Democratic strongholds. You now have a controversy in North Florida, in Bay County, a Republican stronghold where the election supervisor there decided to allow email voting because you had victims of Hurricane Michael, wanted to make it as easy as he possibly could for people to vote. The problem is that was not included in the governor's executive order to loosen some of the restrictions. So Democrats are looking at this and saying, if you're looking for evidence of illegal voting activity, look to North Florida, not to Southeast Florida. And with that, you're getting this tit for tat. And they're saying, look, had that same courtesy been extended of email voting statewide, the results could have been different. So you're getting a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda, and it's coming from both sides. Lawsuits are flying. And this is just day 2 of the recount. Much more to come.
That's an amazing report. Craig, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Katherine Harris was, of course, a figure from history. She was the Secretary of State in Florida during the 2000 presidential recount, and she joins us tonight. Katherine Harris, thanks very much for coming on tonight. So,
Tucker, thank you for having me.
For those of us who are not familiar with the intricacies of election law, the most basic question first, how could thousands of uncounted ballots appear after the polls close?
Okay, Tucker, we're a nation of laws. Rule of law is the most important bedrock in our country,
yes.
And no one can wax eloquently more than you on that subject. But the most important aspect of these elected supervisors of elections in each county, I think we have a basic expectation that they're going to operate with courage and integrity. Funny that you have to say courage when following the law, but this is a critical issue that they follow the law as it's written, not as they want it to be. And so how ballots show up late, they're going to have to explain that because there's a chain of custody. All those issues will come up as a result.
But having watched this very carefully, and no one's watched it more carefully than you have, does that produce alarm bells in your head when you see someone show up in what appears to be a settled election with a box of ballots saying these haven't been counted? Do you wonder, what is this?
Of course you do. Of course you do. And that all is supposed to be recorded, documented. There were supposed to be updates during the course of the election and certainly afterwards that Palm Beach and Broward have failed to perform. So what's going to happen is there are laws that must be followed. There are laws according to who is an eligible voter. So if someone is a felon in this election, their vote is not counted. If someone is an illegal alien. They're not allowed to determine Florida's future or the future of our nation. Their vote will not be counted. If absentee ballot signature doesn't match up with the absentee ballot on record, they're allowed to count that vote. It's the same as a bank. You wouldn't be able to cash a check. And so these are all the issues they're going to have to deal with. They have to follow the rule of law and the law in the state of Florida. Actually, our election laws are sufficient to handle this. It's just a matter of people are breaking them or not.
What's so interesting is, given all the scrutiny that your state came under 18 years ago in the recount, to see someone in charge of recording votes in a county in Southeast Florida with a documented record of screwing it up in the most obvious ways, illegally destroying ballots, how could that person still be in charge of ballot counting?
So in Florida, the supervisor of elections in each of the 67 counties are constitutional officers. They are elected by their counties. They cannot be removed by the Secretary of State. So there is a background, clearly, that she has. I was not involved in the case.
Right.
But only the governor can remove her for cause for those actions.
I mean, this is a subjective question, but you might be someone who could answer it. How politicized is the election process in your or other states, honestly?
So honestly, as Secretary of State, when I was there, you have the media, you have your different parties that are so active, but the Office of Secretary of State in Division of Elections was not politicized. In fact, we shut it down. Republican operatives or Democrats could not come in. We met with the heads of both party initially, and then we actually hired a Democrat constitutional lawyer to come in and advise our attorneys in-house to make sure that we were following the letter of the law. We made certain that the process was going to follow the law. That was our only safe harbor. And my encouragement or my advice to these supervisors of elections would be that they must follow the law. No matter what they do, half the people are going to be very unhappy with them. But their only safe harbor is to follow the law.
Catherine Harris, it must give you vertigo to watch all this. I bet you're glad you're not involved this time around.
Well,
Thank you.
It does seem like deja vu all over again, Tucker.
I can't even imagine. Thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Another man whose name you will recognize if you followed the history of this stuff, Kendall Coffey. He served as Al Gore's attorney during the 2000 recount. Harmeet Dillon serves on the board of the Republican National Lawyers Association, and both of them join us tonight. Thank you both very much for coming on. Kendall Coffey, first to you. There may be something that is missing in the translation here, but you have what appeared to be a pretty straightforward case of ineligible voting in Florida, where someone who was not a U.S. citizen voted in a federal election, and the lawyer, both for the Democratic candidate for governor and the Democratic candidate for senator, both of them objected to disqualifying that vote. On what grounds would they do that?
No grounds. It was a bad idea. It certainly wasn't embraced by the legal teams, much less by the candidates. When you get thousands of volunteers happening in a case, some of them are going to say things they never should have said. This was something that was immediately disowned, should never happen, but it was one non-vote in an election where there are 8 million votes that have been cast. So it's pretty darn remote and insignificant in the context of things.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll find out. Do you think, Harmeet, that, I mean, what struck me about this is that I've been told many times on this show that that doesn't happen at all, and I don't know the extent to which it does. Does it happen a lot? Should we be worried about the integrity of our elections?
Oh, of course we should. I think this example shows it, and the Democrats are employing a scorched earth policy here. I mean, they reflexively think every vote should be counted, whether it is legally cast, legally received, legally matches up with the signature on record or the county on record or not. And that's not what our system of laws is, as Catherine Harris just mentioned. Just as an example, Tucker, in Arizona, in the election that was just concluded, there were 1,470 registrations by aliens in just one county there. So those are people who signed up and said, I want to vote in this election. That's one county. That absolutely happens all over the country, and it is a serious issue that Democrats don't want us looking into because most of those votes are going to be going that way.
So, Kendall Coffey, I think that every valid vote should be counted, and I think we should do all we can to make sure that every vote is counted. Obviously, that's democracy. But what is the answer to the question, where do these votes come from after the polls have closed? And we think all the votes have been counted, and then somebody shows up with a box and says, here are new votes. Shouldn't we find out why those votes weren't counted? What is that, I guess, is my question.
There should be an explanation. I think what the supervisors will say is they're running around all day in a very intense election trying to deal with things. A lot of ballots come in on the day of election by 7 p.m. There's a huge amount of late-breaking interest in this midterm and a lot of late-arriving ballots. Could it have been handled? Should it have been handled better in terms of informing the public about the status of votes? Absolutely. But the reality is that Broward got their votes in on time Saturday. We have a recount process that was created by Republican legislators, rules for recounting that are very well specifically drawn by Republican administrations, and a state supervisor of election and secretary of state that have been Republican appointees for the last 20 years. And yes, they've been paying attention to Brenda Snipes and every part of this election.
So I want to ask you about that, Harmeet. Brenda Snipes is a name I have not heard before, and I'm not here to attack Brenda Snipes. But I wonder when any question about Brenda Snipes' handling of this is dismissed as a racial attack, I wonder maybe if that's not, a diversion designed to get us not to pay attention to what Brenda Snipes is doing. Do you think there's cause for concern in that specific case?
Tucker, I am here to attack Brenda Snipes. She absolutely deserves to be attacked, and her behavior here has been outrageous, cavalier. It required a court order to allow reporters and observers back in to watch the counting there. Contrary to what Kendall just said, they actually did try to count ballots after Saturday noon deadline, so they have attempted to do that. They have mixed in ballots. They have been observed filling in circles in her county of undercount ballots as well. So I think her behavior is outrageous. I'm wondering why, given this repeated pattern of conduct, the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Election Section has not opened up an investigation into this. I mean, this is a repeated pattern of behavior there. And, just like you said, with regard to her gender and her race being pointed out, the same exact arguments are being used in Georgia on behalf of Stacey Abrams. Like, oh, why would you attack her and question her? She's a woman of color. What does that have to do with it? It has zero to do with it. And the Democrats are really kind of undermining their own arguments with these silly appeals to labels.
Well, these ultimately seem like math questions, and I hope we can solve them in a rational way. Thank you both very much for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tucker.
We've got a Fox News alert for you, Glenn. Republican Martha McSally has conceded the Senate race in Arizona, the one that she thought she won. The new senator from that state will be Kyrsten Sinema. McSally led on election night, but a surge of late-counted votes carried Sinema to the lead. Independent Women's Voice senior fellow Lisa Booth has been following this race since its earliest stages and joins us tonight to explain exactly what happened. Lisa Booth, what exactly, if you could bottom line what happened in this election that Martha McSally and everyone watching thought she won, but now she just conceded she's not going to be the new senator, what happened?
Right, and as you mentioned, the Associated Press has called the race. She has conceded. I think the problem largely looks like Maricopa County. This Maricopa County represents about 60% of the state's population.
Yeah.
It's Republican leading, but Sinema has actually been leading there. That's where these new votes came in from tonight that really put her over the top, which is why the Associated Press ended up calling the race. However, I would also think about the fact that Martha McSally might have a chance of trying to get elected as a senator in Arizona looking at 2020, because remember, Senator Kyle is really a placeholder for the late Senator John McCain. So she could potentially eye that race in 2020. Whoever wins that special election in 2020 would then have to run again in 2022. So she might be someone, that wants to throw her name in the hat for that race.
Well, for sure. It's interesting, though. I just read an analysis, and it was on 538, not a right-wing site, that said between 2000 and 2015, every single recount statewide that changed an election result changed it in the Democrats' favor, every single one. So that doesn't prove anything, but you got to ask the obvious question. And the obvious question in this case is, Martha McSally is satisfied that this process was fair?
Well, she conceded. So, it'll be interesting to see what articles or what surfaces this week, if there are any articles that, draw any attention to anything nefarious that went on in any of these counties, or particularly Maricopa County. But as of right now, she has conceded. So I guess not enough for her to not concede, right?
Can I just ask one more quick dumb question? So we keep seeing these races where they get called, and all the news organizations, ours and every other, says, we know who the winner is, and then we find out, oh, wait, there are all these votes who haven't been counted.
Right.
Why don't secretaries of state alert the public and the candidates and us that actually we're not really sure because we haven't counted all the votes? Has that occurred to anybody to do that?
That's a good point, Tucker. And we've also got that going on in Georgia right now because that race still hasn't been called. We should know more information tomorrow. Tomorrow, the deadline is 5 p.m. for counties to certify the results and get those to the Secretary of State. However, Stacey Abrams has, 2 lawsuits pending, one trying to move that deadline to Wednesday, and she's also trying to get absentee ballots that have been thrown out counted. So
we are on that. We will see you again, Lisa Booth.
Okay, thank you, Tucker. Have a great night.
Hillary Clinton could run for president in 2020. One of her former close advisors is saying that. Mark Stein joins us after the break. Tell us what that might mean. Stay tuned.
Tucker.
People always say Hillary Clinton is no artist, but the creativity she's displayed in explaining the reasons that she lost to Trump in 2016, remarkable.
The use of my email account was turned into, the biggest scandal since Lord knows when. They covered it like it was Pearl Harbor. If you look at Facebook, the vast majority of the news items posted were fake. There's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites. I inherit nothing from the Democratic Party. I also think I was the victim of a very broad assumption I was going to win.
We could spend the entire hour playing tapes of all the various ways the election was stolen from her. Anything to avoid confronting the real reasons, apparently. Well, now, longtime advisor to Hillary Clinton, Mark Penn, says that she may indeed try again, a third run at the White House in 2020.
A lot of Democrats think she was unfairly denied winning the last presidential race. She's a pro, and she learns, and Clintons never stop until they get where they want to go, and I say don't count her out.
Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us tonight. So, Mark, so we're treating this like it's crazy. I know both you and I are thinking this is insane, but why is it insane, actually? She is the standard bearer for the Democratic Party. It was stolen from her by the Macedonian data farms. We've agreed on that for a long time. Why wouldn't she be the presumptive nominee, seriously, right now?
Well, I do think it makes a lot of sense. If the 2020 election were to be a rerun of Hillary versus Trump, when the Florida Democrats decide to steal it, then the Broward and Palm Beach County guys will already have the 2016 ballots sitting around in the cupboard, so they won't have to stay up all night running the photocopier as they are at the moment. So it does have a lot to commend it. And Hillary's rationale that she lost because everybody was expecting her to win. She's like the, I think it was the Yogi Berra joke, that it's, whatever the line was, it's such a popular restaurant, nobody goes there. And that's basically the Hillary campaign. But she's convinced that the third time will be the charm. And I don't rule her out because compared to Bernie and Joe Biden, she has the bloom of youth upon her.
What would she run on? What she ran on last time? Vote for me or you're immoral?
Well, I think she should actually go back to where she was in the early 90s when she was the crazy left-winger who believed in universal health care. Then she became the centrist Senate candidate. Then she ran last time as basically this kleptocrat who was raking in the big bucks from Kazakh oligarchs and various Saudi princes. So basically, the Democrat Party has slid to where she was circa 1992. You can see why she's kind of annoyed that she doesn't get the credit for that.
No, that's such a good point. And do you remember that? I mean, you were around. I was, too. People thought that she was really left-wing before she went full-blown corporate Walmart board member, apologist for big tech. If she returned to that, she might have a shot, for real.
Yeah, no, she was. If you remember, she was, I mean, people don't remember this, but her mentor was Jessica Mitford of the English Mitford sisters, who was the left-wing communist Mitford sister. So then she moves to the center, becomes one of these third-way Democrats. Then she becomes, as I said, one of these kleptocrat, centrist Democrats. Meanwhile, the party all has slid to the left because all the romance is on the far left. And I do think, in fairness to her, that as stiff and incompetent and incapable of connecting with the voters as she is, that she's learned her lessons from last time. Last time, Trump's Russian pals bought $100,000 worth of Facebook ads and stole the election from her. So she figures if she can get a Kazakh warlord to give her 200 grand to spend Facebook ads on, she can steal the 2020 election back from the Macedonian content farmers, and it will be justice.
When she shows up with a Che Guevara t-shirt, we'll know she's taking your advice. Mark Stein, great to see you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Democrats just retook the House. It'll be official in January. First order of business, waging war on the president with the subpoena cannon. What does that mean exactly? Details after the break.
Thousands have been evacuated, and the two main fires located in northern and southern California have already burned more than 200,000 acres. State officials warning the weather will make these fires even more dangerous.
We're still in a red flag weather right now. As mentioned earlier, we're expecting up to 40-mile-per-hour winds through Tuesday. Right now, we have 20% line containment on this fire. We're going to be working all day and all night to try to increase and reinforce that containment.
We'll be following with the very latest on these deadly fires throughout tonight's broadcast. Also tonight, partisan warfare over vote counts, allegations of fraud and criminal abuse of power in the efforts of election officials trying to either preserve or undercut electoral integrity, depending upon whom you hear from. Major midterm races beset by slow and irregular vote counts, recounts, and yes, even a legitimate runoff in Arizona, Georgia, and of course, Florida and Mississippi. And in 2 weeks, that runoff, it is for Mississippi's senatorial seat, where the controversial and highly imprecise supervisor of the Broward County Board of Elections chair, Brenda Snipes, herself no stranger to election nightmares, has denied any wrongdoing, despite the obvious mess she's created and the fraud that has plagued her office in the election backwaters now known as Broward County. We take up all the efforts of the radical left and their eagerness to find, create, or otherwise produce votes in these elections. RNC committeewoman from California, Harmeet Dillon, former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino, political strategist Ed Rollins, all with us here tonight. And President Trump in Europe over the weekend, where he proudly demonstrated his America First agenda, urging European allies to act like mature, responsible nations who should eagerly contribute their fair share to the defense of Europe and quit taking advantage of American generosity, or what President Trump has previously referred to as the stupidity of previous American leaders.
We're getting along from the standpoint of fairness, and I want it to be fair. We want to help Europe, but it has to be fair. Right now, the burden sharing has been largely on the United States, as the president will say, and he understands that. We want to absolutely be there. We want to help. We want to be a part of it. But different countries have to also help.
We'll take up the president's defense of the United States with former White House National Security Chief of Staff Fred Fleitz and former State Department advisor Christian Whiten. And our top story tonight, out-of-control wildfires continue to bear down on California. Fox News correspondent Claudia Cohen is in Paradise, California, with the very latest.
The most destructive wildfire in California's history, now on track to be the state's deadliest. Apocalyptic scenes like these are from the Camp Fire as crews search the smoking ruins in Paradise, California, finding more bodies with more than 200 still reported missing.
We had an engine crew discover a body.
Two of my friends right now are missing, one from Magalia, one out of Paradise. And I'm hoping it ain't one of the body counts.
From the ground and the air, 8,000 firefighters are battling 3 large fires in both northern and southern California as it burns across more than 300 square miles, an area larger than the city of San Diego. The fires have destroyed some 7,000 homes and businesses.
Please, dear God, let me get out of this.
Numerous narrow escapes showing just how quickly these fires move. One woman taking this video as she raced against the Woolsey fire in Malibu. The flames are tearing through areas that haven't seen rain in months. Outgoing Governor Jerry Brown blaming it on climate change.
This is not the new normal. This is the new abnormal. And this new abnormal will continue, certainly in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years.
Meanwhile, a presidential tweet started its own political fire over the weekend as President Trump blamed the blazes on forest mismanagement and threatened to take away federal money. The presidents of two professional firefighters associations shot back, calling Trump's assertion reckless, ill-informed, and demeaning. On Sunday, the Golden State's governor also weighed in.
Managing all the forests in every way we can does not stop climate change. And those who deny that are definitely contributing to the tragedies that we're now witnessing and will continue to witness in the coming years.
The president took a different tone today, tweeting, quote, "The California firefighters, FEMA, and first responders are amazing and very brave. Thank you, and God bless you all." Another fire popped up near Los Angeles this morning. Crews knocked it down pretty fast, but a red flag warning indicating extreme fire danger remains in effect through Tuesday, covering almost all of Southern California. Lou?
Claudia, thank you very much. Two things of note, if I may. Governor Jerry Brown is right. Proper land and forest management will not stop climate change. But that was not the president's assertion. What he said is true, that proper land and forest management will stop many of these runaway forest fires. And with due respect to the firefighter organizations that chastised the president wasn't talking to you, first of all, wasn't talking to you about forest management. Perhaps your focus should remain on fighting fires and stay the hell out of politics. Thank you, Claudia Cowan. Our other top story, the balance of power still in flux tonight in 3 states where the radical left is attacking the sanctity of our votes. In the Arizona Senate race, a dump of new mail-in ballots places Kirsten Sinema more than 32,000 votes ahead, or 1.5 percentage points ahead of the Republican Martha McSally. Around 75% of the votes right now have been cast by mail-in ballot, and traditionally, that produces slow-paced election results, and this year is no exception. More than 200,000 ballots remain to be counted, and Fox News still has this race as too close to call. In Georgia, leftist gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams has filed a lawsuit trying to delay vote certifications until the radical Dems can manufacture enough new votes to force a runoff election. According to Abrams' campaign manager, 73% of supposedly newfound, we put those words in quotes, newly found absentee votes are going Abrams' way. What a surprise. And as of now, Republican Brian Kemp still leads with 50.3% of the vote. Barring any changes as a result of those lawsuits, Georgia's 159 counties will certify their votes tomorrow. The race expected to be called for Kemp within hours of the deadline, before being officially certified by the state next week. Which leads us to the subject of Florida and, of course, Broward County, where a recount is underway in the governor's and senatorial races. As allegations of corruption and fraud continue to fly, eyes especially focused on the 2 heavily Democratic counties of Broward and Palm Beach. Correspondent Phil Keating is in Lauderhill, Florida, with the very latest.
I am urging, because of the highly public nature of this case, to ramp down the rhetoric.
Despite this Broward County judge's advice, while denying Governor Rick Scott's latest lawsuit, that's not happening. Since Sunday morning, after about a 4-hour delay due to machine problems, Broward election workers have been sorting about 800,000 ballots for 30 hours, separating page 1, which has the recount races, from the rest. Once complete, the actual recounting of votes will finally begin, with 12 tabulation machines, 2 extras on loan from Tallahassee. Currently behind in the Senate race by 12,000 votes to Republican Governor Rick Scott, incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson released a YouTube statement this afternoon.
Scott cannot oversee this process in a fair and impartial way, and thus he should remove himself from any role in the recount process.
Scott's also ahead of Nelson in lawsuits filed, 6-2. Today, a Broward judge denied Scott's motion to impound all counting machines and ballots when not in use. Still, with no evidence of fraud, Scott remains on the attack.
Bill Nelson is clearly a sore loser. He can't stand the fact that he's not going to be elected for, the first time in decades, and he won't. He's just here to steal this election.
And President Trump tweeting this: the Florida election should be called in favor of Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis, and that large numbers of new ballots showed up out of nowhere, and many ballots are missing or forged. A statement from Florida's Republican-led Secretary of State's office reads, "Our staff has not seen any evidence of criminal activity in Broward County at this time." In the also being recounted governor's race, Republican Ron DeSantis leads Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum by 33,000 votes. Numerous people have called for Broward's supervisor of elections, Brenda Snipes, to be suspended by the governor. She's been plagued for years for things like illegally destroying ballots and counting votes too soon. This 2016 affidavit filed by an elections worker claimed she saw other workers filling in empty bubbles on ballots in races which had been left blank.
We have 65 out of 67 counties that have accomplished their job under the law. There's not a problem with the law. There's a problem with the competence and the equipment.
Amid the accusations of crime and cheating, new calls today for Governor Scott to recuse himself from the entire recount process, since the outcome directly impacts him. And new tonight reports that about 150 people in the Panhandle, hurricane victims, voted either by email or by fax, which would be illegal. The Secretary of State's office is looking into that. Lou?
Phil, thanks very much. Phil Keating. Lots to look into in Florida, particularly in Broward and Palm Beach counties. Joining us tonight to discuss, well, the midterm elections, the votes, the counting, and some of the attempts to change the count. It appears in some places. Harmeet Dillon joins us. She's attorney, RNC committeewoman for California. Harmeet, great to have you here. Let's start with common sense and our eyes and sense of history. Broward County is the backwater of elections in this country. It is the capital of incompetence and fraud. And why in the world would both parties not have overseers, monitors all over those two places?
Well, the Republican Party certainly does have overseers, monitors, and lawyers on the ground because, as you mentioned, Lou, Broward County has become known as sort of the patient zero of election fraud, if you will, and that's the place from which a lot of these practices are being perpetuated. What's puzzling to me is that, the election official there has been allowed to stay in place for so many years. Jeb Bush did appoint her, but today he called for her to step aside, and now we have to struggle through this. There have been multiple lawsuits filed. Judges have weighed in. Judges have forced Broward County to allow cameras and reporters back in to observe what's going on.
It's pretty amazing that you have to go to a judge to have that happen. Yeah. Don't you think?
Right. It's outrageous. It's like you said, in America, it shouldn't be the case that a judge has to order that. Clearly, the lack of transparency and secrecy is of great concern. But what I will say is that prior incidents of recounts, automatic recounts under Florida law, have never changed the election result by more than a few hundred votes. Yeah. So
I think 284 is the average, isn't it, over time? Has been the average difference in the result, which obviously would be
right.
If this holds to the average.
So that would be less than 500 votes typically with the average. And so neither of these candidates is that close for that to be a factor, unless ballots are being manufactured, which is the allegation, and also ballots are being counted allegedly after the Saturday noon deadline to receive them.
Well,
so a lot of shenanigans are going on there, but ultimately I have confidence that the result is going to remain the same as it was on election night.
Arizona's done, right? All but done, and it looks
Arizona. I think the margin there is not enough for McSally to pick it up. I mean, Republicans have typically had problems in the urban regions throughout the country. That's a fact. It's not voter fraud, and it's those bigger population counties that are still counting the votes. So that's likely to not be going our way. And finally, of course, we have Georgia, where again a sore loser is attempting to kind of engineer the outcome by insisting that people who actually moved moved from one county to the other and didn't update their voter registration. Despite state law to the contrary, they're asking that those votes be counted regardless. So no regard for the rule of law. You can imagine what it would be like in that state if Ms. Abrams were to become the governor. So I think, again, ultimately we're going to see the right thing happen there. It's just sore losers trying to prevent the inevitable from happening.
Yeah, I would frankly, personally prefer to see far more energy and anticipation on the part of the Republican Party, and to be there with boots on the ground before, not after the election. I just, I know you guys put on a great ground game. Ronna McDaniel has been terrific, but I got to tell you, I think you guys recognize